Welcome to this podcast series called Stepping into the Yellow Zone. I'm Juliette Kosarzyski, founder of Yellow Zone International, and I'm doing a series of podcasts where I interview people who have stepped into the yellow zone. And by the stepping into the yellow zone, what I'm talking about is taking on some kind of challenge, doing something a person hasn't done before. Doing something that feels daunting and maybe is even scary, creates a little bit of anxiety. And that's certainly what we're going to hear about today. Today my guest is Tina Prigge. She's a co-founder of and a creative with Vagabond Visual Concepts. She's a lover of life, lover of the theater and of her family. She's an adventurer. She's an optimist. And what she's going to be sharing with us today is her experience where she spent 6 months in India and 6 months in Nepal with nothing more than a backpack, a guidebook, a couple of good friends, and a few rupees in her pocket. So we're going to find out about some of these adventures and the unexpected twists and turns where she discovered that she's capable of far more than she would have ever given herself credit for. So, Tina, thank you for joining me on this interview today.
Hello. How's everything today?
It's great, and I'm excited for our listeners to hear about your adventures. You've told me a little bit about them, and I'm excited to hear even more. So why don't you start by just telling us about this crazy adventure that you had?
Thanks. Well, I think the easy part was probably just deciding to go because adventure is fun, it's lovely, it's exciting. The hard part came with actually carrying through. You know, once my backpack was all ready to go and my parents took me to the airport, my mom was a nervous wreck and my dad was just trying to be supportive. And I remember putting my backpack down and going into Chicago International and just sitting in a stall and trying not to hyperventilate and trying not to throw up because I wasn't exactly sure what I was getting myself into. It was the first time I'd ever put myself into a travel experience where there really wasn't a safety net to be expected. It wasn't under the auspices of any kind of a program or, college international travel abroad. I was really, meeting some friends on a sort of specified date, but they were traveling overland, so it was unsure when we'd meet. So I was kind of going to be flapping in the wind by myself in a part of the world I'd never been to. So I was terribly excited and also terrified at the very same time. It was a really interesting mix, and the adventure was completely lovely, and I'm so glad I did it. I wouldn't change a thing, and I'm glad I played through that fear. So let's see. Do you have another question, or do you want me to keep going?
Well, yeah, let's give a little bit of context, too. What age were you at, and what point in your life were you at?
Oh, let's see. I had graduated college with a 4-year degree, and then I spent 3 years in Japan. And so it was immediately following my 3 years in Japan that I decided to experience the subcontinent. Okay. So I was while I was traveling, I turned 26.
Okay. All right. So still young, but you already had some international experience under your belt. I'm sure that helped quite a bit, right?
It did. I mean, at least for perspective and, knowing that I had to be open-minded, knowing that I was going to, experience a culture completely different from my own and embracing that. Also, because I had some international experience, I did have some on-the-ground connections that I could draw on. So that was really helpful. And I'm really thankful that I did because, I worked as an executive assistant and as a teacher in Japan, so I'm very used to having a plan, like knowing what comes next, knowing what tomorrow holds. And going to India and Nepal, all bets are off. There was just no way to plan. Even from the very start, I had arranged a family to stay with when I first landed in Delhi, a family unknown to me, but through a program I made a connection. And so, there was that little bit of safety, had this lovely family. They were kind enough to drop me off at the airport in time for my flight to then carry on to Nepal. I go to the airport, wave goodbye, thank you, go to check in, and the flight is canceled. And it's not just canceled for an hour. Nobody knows. Maybe it's a day. Maybe it's 2 days. I hope it's not too inconvenient. But so already it was like a nail biter, right on the ground. Like, what do? I just said goodbye to this, family, my only contact in the world that I know in this country of millions of people. And so right away the adventure started. And it was very cool. It was very cool. And then, I stayed in a hotel for a couple of days with some other travelers, finally got my flight, and then landed in Kathmandu, where there were some more family members of a man who worked in an Indian restaurant in Japan that I was friendly with because I went to this restaurant. He said, if you ever go to Nepal, you stay with my family. You'll be so happy, right? So, again, it sounded like a great idea then. It sounded like a great idea while I was eating curry in his restaurant, but now all of a sudden I was arriving at the airport and meeting this family that I didn't know. And it's, these 4 big guys all in leather jackets. I'm like, oh my gosh, are they waiting for me? It was a group that if I had passed, like in an American airport, I would have kept going at quite a clip. But no, they had these great big smiles and they were super welcoming. And so once again, it was just, a very good situation. I just found that I had to really draw on my instincts and trust what was going on. It was really interesting because you had to be kind of in survival mode all the time. You had to be aware there was no just coasting through. There was no, blindly going from one place to another. You were like in the moment constantly. It was the most alive I think I've ever been.
Wow, that's really interesting to hear you talk about that, like the most alive you've ever been. I'm just wondering, what was it about that, the fact that you always had to be in the moment, that you're always in survival mode, so all your senses are so heightened? I mean, is that what it is, or what? Tell me more about that. I'm curious.
I think so. I think it's because, I didn't really know anyone, and I'd gotten a message from my friends that they were about a week delayed from our anticipated meeting date. It turns out in India and Nepal, everything is just kind of random. Everybody is just kind of chill. It's kind of go with the flow. So maybe it's the 8th of the month or the 18th of the month. There's not really much of a difference. But, when you're a planner, that's a big swing. So I think it's just, it was just me and then plugging in and finding out, where I belonged and how I fit in and how I could be respectful but also be safe, and just it was so interesting. But I had to think about, okay, what am I going to eat? Where am I going to eat? Is it going to be safe? I had to think about the water that I took in. It was just so interesting having to think about everything. So many things that we take for granted in the West, running water, a hot shower, so many things now were it was just so new, such a new experience. And I think I was so alive because everything was different.
Well, I'm just
and
wondering
so stimulating.
If that's exhausting. I mean, it's stimulating, but does it get exhausting after a while to have to be at that level of heightened awareness about your water and your food and bathing and all these kinds of things?
Yeah, and then even when you're sleeping, if you're on transportation, taking a train, you have to be very careful of your belongings. It does take its toll, I think. But there's something so alive, something so thrilling. So I think you really do sleep well at night. But I think adventurers too, when you're in the midst of an adventure, you know that the sleep will come later. I think the thrill outweighs the need for sleep.
Sure. Now, when you set out on this journey, did you know you were going to be gone for a year? Like, did you book your round trip ticket right away so you knew you were going to be gone for a year?
I had no idea. I had a one-way ticket to Kathmandu. So I didn't even know that I was going to be spending time in India. I had no idea. I just knew that I wanted to have the experience. I knew that some of my girlfriends were going to be arriving in Kathmandu, and that was pretty much all I knew. So the fact that I even went to India at all, one of the places I never wanted to go in the world, that I had just this innate fear of, was Calcutta. I didn't have any interest in it. I had a fear of it, and I ended up spending almost 3 weeks there and had a very, great time. And I'm so glad I did, because once again, I was letting some fear guide me and take my decisions without even having had the experience. And what I really learned day after day after day is things that I was worried about or things that I would have shied away from or things that I tended to, fear. If I just faced them head on, if I experienced it, if I tried it, there really wasn't that much to fear. Yes, you still had to be careful and you had to be smart and all of that, but so often the experience, playing through whatever that fear was, ended up being so much more satisfying than, if I'd just chosen my safe little fear path.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me about this decision to go to Calcutta then. You had a fear about going there, so did you intentionally say, I'm going to go, or did it just end up becoming an option and you chose it and you weren't really expecting that, or you found yourself there mistakenly? I mean, what ended up happening that you ended up there?
Yeah, I was trying to avoid it. After a few months in Nepal, some of the friends that I'd made traveling, they said, we're going to go scuba diving in the Andaman Islands. And the Andaman Islands are off the east coast of India, and you can get there from Calcutta by ferry. I said, okay, I love scuba diving. I'm in. Let's do it. I don't want to go through Calcutta. They're like, well, no, it's the only way. I mean, there are other ways, but it'll cost a lot more. And come on, we're all going to Calcutta, and it's no big deal. We'll get there. The ferry leaves the next day. I'm like, oh, okay, you know what? Why am I being a baby about this? Right. One day in Calcutta, one overnight, hop on the ferry, go. No big deal. So we ended up getting to Calcutta. And what happens? The ferry, they're on strike or there's some kind of delay. Again, they don't know how long. So every day we kind of go back, we check in, and after 3 weeks, we finally get to the islands. And so it was 3 weeks really of not having a plan and just experiencing life in Calcutta. And it was far more lovely and enjoyable than I would have ever expected. And I would have never known that if I hadn't tried it, if I hadn't gone.
And do you know what your fear was based on? Was it something you read, a movie you watched, or where's all this fear coming from? Had something happened recently in that part of the world that gave the place a bad reputation?
Yeah, I think it was, I'm not really a big city person anyway, and so it is a huge city. And I think I had heard some things about, some unrest. I think I'd heard things about crime, danger in the big city. Again, I wasn't ever expecting to go to India, so I wasn't really well informed either. So it was kind of just this unknown fear, which is the worst thing to guide yourself by, right? So it really helped me to see through those things, to see through generalizations that I might collect about things. It's really helped me to rethink a lot of decisions that I would just, knee-jerk reactions that I would have. Because truly, my fear of Calcutta was a knee-jerk reaction.
Got it. And I'm curious about how that kind of experience ended up perhaps influencing you in other areas in your life, and perhaps later on in life. The fact that you went to Calcutta, the fact that you went on this 1-year trip that you didn't expect to be a year, you didn't expect to be, in Calcutta for 3 weeks, all these unexpected things. I mean, how did this kind of experience shape you and benefit you?
When I look back, even when I was going through some of the experiences, I was like, wow, I didn't realize I was capable of that. I didn't know I had that in me. I didn't know I had that fortitude or that bravery or that courage. And I think giving up yourself that kind of test, knowing that you've tested yourself and you can do that, when you come back here, there's not a lot of things that are challenges of that degree. You know what I mean? So when I face life now, knowing that I tested myself in those ways, I feel like I'm prepared, like I've got that courage to draw on, that I really am capable of far more than I would have ever given myself credit for. So after going through Calcutta and knowing I could brave that, there was an opportunity to ride a camel for 2 weeks across the desert. Not something I would have necessarily raised my hand for, but after having this experience, thinking, okay, I'm going to be miles from Interpol. There's only going to be 2 girls, going through the desert.
With a guide, right? With a group or somebody to guide you?
Yeah, there were three local guides, and a couple of camels.
Okay.
And so, it's one of those things where this time I didn't even think twice about it. Like, I knew it was going to be out of my comfort zone, but it sounded just so exciting. And I knew that Calcutta had turned out much better than I would have ever expected. And so it helped me, I think, to embrace these new and exciting things.
That's fantastic. I mean, and especially to have that kind of experience so early in your life, right, when you're in your 20s, to realize that you are capable of so much more, that there's, that a lot of times we have fears that are not really grounded in any truth. And then to realize it's like, if I just maybe face this thing that I'm afraid of, I'll realize it's not so scary after all. And once you have that experience, I think you just have more confidence in pursuing other things. And like you said, instead of being afraid of this camel trek, you jumped on the bandwagon with excitement, right? Because wow, sure, let's see what this is all about. This could be fun, and it was.
And I think you hit the nail on the head too. That being young and having that experience was so important. I was unattached, not married, no children. Now, when I think back, like as a mom, if my son comes up to me and he's like, Mom, I want to do this, I'd be nervous all over again. I can see why my mom was such a nervous wreck. And now that I'm a mom, I find that I'm more cautious again because there's, somebody that's dependent on me. Where when I was young, I could be much bolder, much more brazen with my choices, much more courageous. And so I'm especially glad that I had that experience because I still draw on it a lot. I have to remind myself that even though I'm being cautious, I still do have that courage and I still am capable of those things. I proved it to myself.
It's interesting that you've had this adventurous part of your life, but that you become a little bit more restrained or cautious, and it makes sense because you're a mother. And I just wonder almost, perhaps once your son gets older, that maybe you'll loosen the reins a bit on your thinking for him and for yourself and start having some of these adventures again?
I think so. I hope so. I would love to have adventures like that together with him. It opened my eyes to so much in the world, and I think that it's an important experience for anyone to step out of their comfort zone and to experience what's going on. Our little corner of the world, the things that we're accustomed to and acculturated to, it's different in every corner of the world, and we can grow so much from experiencing that and then also from sharing it, that kind of cross-pollination. It's quite amazing.
That's fantastic. Well, I'm wondering if you have any parting words of wisdom to somebody who's listening to this and they're thinking, I don't know if I could do that, or I don't know if I'd want my child to do that. And maybe they never have done that, and maybe they're 40s or 50s or older now, and they're thinking, oh, maybe my time has passed for having those kind of adventures. What would you say to that person?
You have to remain positive in adversity, and you have to be open-minded, and you can do it. It is so worth it. The personal growth, the experience, I highly recommend it. There's a whole circuit out there. There are people traveling the world all of the time, and you can do it. This day and age, it is easier than it has ever been. Just be safe, be smart. Don't be rude. Again, be open-minded. Our ways are not always the right ways, especially when we're visitors. And when in doubt, sing a song.
All right, there sounds like there's a story behind that one.
Well, singing a song, in particular, Cecilia saved our life a number of times. There was one instance in particular, Calcutta. So we had just arrived in Calcutta, and we were at the train station. No, we were trying, yes. So we were at the train station in Calcutta, 3 Western girls, and about 1,000 Indian men, all waiting for the same train. And apparently the story is that there's some huge exam that had just finished, and so all of these men were trying to get back to their home villages and their families. And the train was late, and just like some of the other delays, nobody knew how long it would be. And so, the environment got a little, you could tell people were getting a little testy, a little impatient. We were just trying to be very inconspicuous, and of course they started to notice us and take interest, and, it started to get a little, crowded feeling. So fortunately we had walking sticks and our big backpacks, and the three of us were able to stand back to back. But the crowd kept encroaching closer and closer, and the train station guard really, didn't really mind whatever happened to the three girls. So we could tell we were on our own. And just when it seemed like it was hitting this breaking point, we looked at each other, the three girls, and we just burst out into singing Cecilia. And it immediately broke the tension. And, there were smiles all around. It reminded me almost of a Coca-Cola commercial, because all of a sudden this one guy goes, "Cold drinks for the madam," and this little boy tears off and comes back with these cold bottles of Coca-Cola, and they, pat a seat for us to sit down, and they start talking to us about America and visas and what we thought about India and what our favorite experience was, and it just ended up being a lovely experience. So much so that when we finally got to our destination, one of the gentlemen brought us to his home to meet his mom and his sister and had dinner with us, and it turned out to be an incredible experience. So even from, what seemed like a fearful moment, just being positive and, I guess, breaking out into Cecilia turned it around.
Love that. Such a great story. I think we'll just end on that note, because I love the visual image of that, of, three of you back to back with your big backpacks, each holding your walking stick and just singing with 1,000 men around you. Love it.
You can't make this stuff up.
No, you can't make this stuff up. Fantastic. Well, that's just so inspirational. I love hearing about travel adventures, because you're right, they open up your mind, they make you realize how you're capable of so much more. And then when you come back, you've got this sense of confidence. It's like, wow, if I can do that, what else can I do? And I love that what you're talking about, how it just made you feel, the most alive when you're doing a trip like this. And I think you're right. When you're doing something that's new and exciting and challenging and a little scary, you've got so much going on, so much stimulation, that you do feel very alive. And sometimes we need to remember, in order to have that feeling again, we need to go and do something new again and challenge ourselves. And that's what stepping into the yellow zone is all about. That's why I encourage people to keep taking on these challenges, doing fun things. And for you, it might be, traveling overseas, and for another person, it might be, taking a class of something they've never done before, like learning how to weld, or how to cook. How to cook some Portuguese food or something like that. So that will wrap up this session of Stepping into the Yellow Zone. I want to thank you so much, Tina, for sharing your adventures with us. And
my pleasure. Thank you, Juliet.
Yeah, thank you. And if any of our listeners are interested in being interviewed for this series, certainly go ahead and contact me, and I will look forward to continuing to hear about other people's adventures as they step into the yellow zone. So that's it for today, and we'll hear from you next time. Thank you.